And I say it's a lot easier to reset the codes when you don't have the trauma running in the background. That can have a major effect on the kids.
Wow. Yeah, I'm literally replaying hers for 5 years. Oh my gosh. Hello and welcome to another episode of Rit to Rise. I am your host, Dr. Emily Splichal, and today we are going to be focusing on the rise side of Rit to Rise, where we are going to be looking at the power of your mind. And my guest today is a specialist in this area. But before I bring him on, I'm going to share a quick bio on my guest. Dr. Don Wood is a PhD in clinical counseling, author, and the founder of Inspired Performance Institute. He helps people reframe their trauma and get their lives to a place of high performance. After spending years researching how trauma affects our minds and our lives, Dr. Don has found that events and experiences throughout our lifetime continue to play a role in how we experience life in the present. And we are going to explore that today with Dr. Don. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this. This is great.
Excellent. Wonderful. So to kick it off, I want to read a statement for you and have you share some thoughts on it. So we all carry unresolved trauma, painful memories and experiences that linger in the background of our minds, quietly disrupting our lives. Can you say more about this?
Yeah, those experiences are being played in high definition. So when we have a traumatic event, all our senses are heightened: sight, sound, hearing. So your mind has recorded that in high definition. If I asked you what you ate for breakfast last night, right, what would you tell me? You'd probably say, I had this or that. What you would do is you would look up. And when you looked up, you saw pictures of what you ate. Mm-hmm. That is what your mind is doing. You're seeing the pictures in real time. Your subconscious mind operates in the present. So it sees the traumatic memory as something that's happening now, and it creates a response to it.
So when we hear trauma, I would talk about this topic all day, every day, but sometimes listeners, when you say trauma, they have a little bit of unease around that word. And I think sometimes people think trauma, like capital T trauma, assault, car accident, a death, something like that. But then there's what I've heard people refer to as like little t trauma. So can you just talk about that word and maybe change some of the stigma around the word trauma so that people can relate to that?
Yeah, I wrote my second book called Emotional Concussions, because it's actually what it is. Is sometimes traumas can be big T traumas, the obvious ones, like an assault or a car accident, like you said. But it could be small T traumas, the way the mind is responding to previous events and experiences. Like, for example, if you had a coach that told you as a child that you're never going to make it, that's an emotional concussion. Or a teacher that called you stupid, or parents that were overly critical. They tried to be intentional, right, and try to be positive, but they created a lot of emotional concussions. Those emotional concussions can add up to big T trauma.
So this emotional concussion, that small t, things that are maybe not perceived as trauma, do you believe that all of us to some degree have that?
Yeah, we all have that to some degree. Now the question is what your resiliency is. What's your resiliency to those emotional concussions? Some people don't have very much because they were never raised that way. They were raised with a constant state of uncertainty, and that uncertainty creates the response. So if your mind has been very certain and you had a few emotional concussions, you can overcome that and be able to perform fairly well. But if you grew up with uncertainty, a lot of fear of the future, then that will create anxiety, and then that will affect the way you operate in the present.
So you mentioned anxiety. Is anxiety reflective or like a mirror that there was uncertainty growing up?
Yeah, So anxiety is basically a fear of the future. We're afraid of what's going to happen. And so our mind starts looking at experiences or the way we're responding now to a situation. And then it exaggerates it. It starts playing it out. And then the mind doesn't the number one fear for the human mind is uncertainty. So the uncertainty creates this response. Uncertainty creates a fear that something's not going to work out. And then we start living it. And then when we start to live it, then our mind starts to get anxious.
How does this affect relationships? Primarily the intimate relationship.
It's going to have a major effect. For example, my wife and I grew up with two completely different atmospheric conditions, which I call atmospheric conditions.
Okay.
I grew up with idyllic atmospheric conditions. My life was very, very calm, relaxed. I never really had any trauma. I had a few bumps here and there, but no emotional concussions. And if she grew up in the opposite household, where she had this constant state of fear. Her father was very violent, and you just couldn't anticipate what was going to happen. So she grew up with that fear that there could be something that could happen. I have to be prepared for it. That was why her mind would start to feel anxious. So I'd say something as simple as, no, I don't like that. And then she would respond with, she'd start to cry and say, why are you mad at me? And I'd go, I'm not mad at you. And she, yes, you are. You're getting mad. I can tell by the way you're saying that. She had learned to listen very carefully to the way her father spoke, because that's the way her mind protected her. So that is going to create that uncertainty, and then that will create the relationship issue.
Got it. So how that makes sense as far as it kind of bleeding into these interpersonal relationships. And of course, there's relationships at work, which I know is one of your focuses as well, is work performance. But do you also work with like athletes and that side of performance, and how mind and past traumas can infiltrate into that area as well?
Yeah, because athletes, even though athletes are performing at a fairly high level, they have another gear. So that unresolved trauma is going to be affecting them. For example, I had a golfer who had all the talent in the world, but wasn't really making it on the PGA Tour. The reason being is his mind had created this fear of uncertainty. So the uncertainty created this doubt. And then his mind would then he'd get very, very angry when something didn't work out. So if he could get that under control, that fear came in from a major accident that had happened. His brother and father were killed. So his brother and father were killed when he was 15, again, not fully matured. And then and they were on their way to pick him up at a golf course. So then whatever played out was always affecting him. And then that loop was always running. So if something didn't work out, that created a fear. And then that fear would create the anger response.
Okay. Do you have any other examples with athletes? Like, I just find that area very intriguing because of performing at that level when you have the best of the best, the 1%. Really what's probably differentiating them at their performance level is the mind. So do you have any other examples of how past traumas or past beliefs can kind of bleed into athletic performance, especially at like Olympic level, pro level?
Yeah, at the pro level, for example, I had a guy, Mark Giusetto. He had lost both his legs to frostbite from a suicide attempt.
Oh.
And his cousin had committed suicide from the trauma of, he moved from Kenya to Alaska. He got a scholarship, him and his cousin, to the University of Alaska. So you can imagine the change in the culture. So that change in culture created a lot of uncertainty. So his cousin didn't acclimate very well. He committed suicide. Marco committed suicide, attempted suicide from that. and ended up passing out in the snow for 2 days. So he lost both his legs. And then that created a physical response. They had to build him new prosthetics again, and they built him blades to run on again. Now, Marco was a good athlete, and he could perform fairly well. So he started running in marathons and was doing fairly well. But the trauma, the coaches that were training him said he wasn't performing very well based on the training they were giving him. They thought the trauma was affecting him. So they had him come in and work out. I say it affects the mitochondria. The mitochondria in the cell gets affected by the trauma. So he was performing fairly well. So anyway, I took him through the program. 9 days later, he runs in a race. Takes 15 seconds per mile off his time. So that's a pretty big change. Then about a month later, ran in a Boston Marathon and broke the world record. Then 2 months later, ran again and broke his own world record by another 5 minutes and gets signed by Nike. He's still the fastest man in the world, right? They can't help it. He's just going to be the fastest man in the world. And it's because of his mind focusing on the trauma. And now it's not.
Yeah. So what do you mean trauma lies within the mitochondria?
So the mitochondria is affected by, so the energy, the ATP in the cell is actually compromised. Part of that energy is taken up by the trauma.
Okay.
So that trauma is running, and they're going to be focusing on it, and then that's going to affect their performance. When we clear the trauma, we clear the gateway to the energy, then the energy becomes available.
Almost like an energy leak, right? Or wasted energy over here versus focusing on this.
Yep. And it's so many times, I've got so many examples of it. One gentleman who was running in the races, he used to race all the time, but he used to practice. And so he went through the program, and he was just taking it like fairly easy. He wasn't trying to improve his performance or anything. He just wanted to see how the program worked. Anyway, he performed in the session. And what we did is he took off running at the end of the race. So what he did, I'm confused. He ran in a race a few days later, and then he started running all the time. Then he was running with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend said, "Why are you running so fast?" And he said, "Well, I'm not running faster, I'm just running." And she said, "Well, you're trying to beat me." And he says, "No, I'm not, I'm just running." And what he was doing was breaking personal bests. He reviewed his times and was making personal bests. That's what happens and he didn't even notice it until he started trying to time himself. So
I like that. I've never heard it described that way. I've heard that trauma sits within like your fascia and in your body.
Even a female, she was a swimmer at her high school, university, and she was doing fairly well, and then she did the program, and then about a month later, started looking at her personal best and was making personal best after she won a meet by a long shot. And she hadn't realized that she'd improved that much. And I said, "I didn't make you faster. You were always that fast." I said, "I just improved the time by getting rid of the trauma."
Yeah. I mean, that's convincing to a lot of people. I feel like, sign me up, Dr. Don. I would love to have extra energy. I love that. So you obviously take a very unique approach with trauma. I know we haven't dove into the yet. So can you share with the listeners how you uniquely approach trauma to clear it and then allow people to tap into this high performance?
Well, first of all, what we do is we take the trauma. I spend about 4 to 5 hours with the person. The first 2 hours are just science and education. Okay. So I'm just teaching you how the brain works, why the particular effects will be on the brain, and then we start working on the trauma.
Okay.
Then I'll work on 3 events. So I'll I'll have you choose 3 basic events in your lifetime that have been traumatic or disturbing, 2 or 3. And what I'll do is I'll take those events, one, as I take you through it, as we're going through it. You don't have to talk about it. You just have to share it. And so I'm looking for about a minute highlight reel, minute or 2 minutes of a highlight reel. Then what I do is I reset it during that minute and 2 minutes, even though you're not talking about it. I have no idea what the trauma is. Now, they can talk about it if they want to, but they don't need to. All I need them to do is to review it in their mind.
Okay.
And so as they see it going through, their mind is then seeing it in real time, and I take it out of real time into the same format as what they ate for dinner last night.
Okay.
Then it stops calling for the action. Because the mind thinks that the trauma is real and it's happening now. And there's nothing happening. They're just responding to the way it used to be, and now it's not.
And then what is the effect that the individual would notice? I know the increase in energy is one, but I think for someone who's not a high-performing athlete, who just has maybe anxiety and some traumatic experiences, what would they be able to connect to? Or would they not notice until kind of they start encountering the world again?
So sometimes they notice right away. So I'll ask them to go back over that event and tell me what you feel now. And they'll look at it and they'll think about it and they'll say, I don't feel anything. I'm not responding to it. That's really different than the way they used to. They used to look at it as if it was a happening now. So how you can tell if a traumatic event is still happening is you feel an emotion.
Okay.
Because I talk about anytime you feel an emotion, your mind is calling for an action.
Okay.
The purpose of fear is to escape. The purpose of anger is to attack. So if you think of something that happened to you 5 years ago and you feel fear, that's a glitch. Your mind is thinking that you need to run. So Rebecca Gregory was the first, she was responsible for, she had trauma from the Boston Marathon bombing surviving. So as she started to recall it, she started to shake and cry. She was 4 feet from the first bomb that went off. So I said to her, I said, Rebecca, do you know why you're shaking and crying right now? And she says, well, because I'm talking about it. And I said, right, but your mind thinks there's a bomb about to go off. So even though it was 5.5 years ago, her mind kept seeing it as if it was now. What I was able to do for her is take it out of that high definition, which is now, and put it into a format. She didn't forget about it. She just didn't respond to it. Your mind responds to real events, and it responds to remembered events. It responds to the remembered event as if it's a real event. And then your mind's going to call for an action, because the purpose of an emotion is an action. So if you don't have the emotion, you shouldn't have the action, you shouldn't have the response.
Right, right. So is this a method that you created, or is this kind of your evolution of what you found truly works and releases this trauma?
It's sort of my own method as well. There's some parts of it that I've used from previous experiences, but this is really unique to me. And so I'm able to respond to it that way.
Got it. Now, this approach of high definition to, I don't know, commonplace. Low definition, yeah, thank you. Is, I understand it's your method. It's about kind of like reframing a little bit of what it is, bring it out of the now into thinking it's this present moment, and again, kind of changing that definition. Why is that not done more in traditional therapy? Like talk therapy and behavioral therapy?
I don't know. One of the biggest reasons is because it takes longer. So it takes about 2 hours for the mind to get set up in order to start changing. Traditional therapy is only an hour. So they never get the brain into that condition to reset it. And so I use 4 hours or 5 hours by the time, never talked about the trauma for the first 2 hours. By the time it's 2 hours into it, it's so relaxed and focused that trauma just falls off.
Got
It's just
it.
really, really quick.
And then is that something that you would do to every event, theoretically? Or do you find that when you start to shift one traumatic experience, as the others kind of start to fall off as well, especially if they were in the same maybe age period?
Yeah, it's also probably the same theme. So if it's an abandonment issue or it's a
Okay.
trauma, right? I work on 2 or 3 different events, not the same event. So if the person had 2 sexual abuses, I just work on one of them, or maybe work on the second one if they didn't have a lot. But just try to create a scenario where the mind no longer sees it as if it's happening now. And it takes it out of that response by resetting and reviewing the information in real time. And then it looks at it and says, oh, that's not happening now. I don't need to be having a response to it. It doesn't go for happy. We're not going for happy that they had the Boston Marathon bombing, but we're going for, like, yay,
Yeah.
like this happened. They're just
Yeah.
going to a response that is appropriate. And the appropriate response is no emotion.
Got it. So it's about bringing something that was in the past, leave it in the past, theoretically.
Yeah.
So that individual
Yeah.
doesn't think that it's happening in the present moment.
Yeah. And that's what creates all the confusion and people aren't aware of it. They recall the old event, even though it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they see it like it's happening now. That creates a response. The autonomic nervous system has to respond to a current threat. So it's looking at it in high definition, very, very intense, and then it responds to it. What we do is take it out of high intensity into low intensity, and then the mind says, yeah, I remember that. That happened 5 years ago. Yeah, I'm not happy about it, but I don't need to respond.
Yeah. What's fascinating is the mind is so powerful. Is there kind of like a reinforcement, homework, things that you would add on to that? And just what is some of that, just in general, that's really good for healthy mindset?
So we have the mind look at that event after the 4 hours, and then we review it. And then they listen to 30 days of audios. That's just reinforcing. And the 30 days of audios are designed, they're about 8 to 10 minutes a day. And then there's 5 questions with each one. And the 5 questions, they're just for them to answer. But it starts questioning whether or not, did I think this way? Why did I think this way? And then they start questioning themselves and going, yeah, there's no point in thinking that way.
Okay.
And then they start to reinforce it. But it's a lot easier. Those are the codes that get built. And I say it's a lot easier to reset the codes when you don't have the trauma running in the background. What the traditional therapy tries to do is build new codes, build new coping mechanisms to train you, but you've still got the trauma running.
Yeah.
And the trauma is running, it's going to affect the codes.
Got it. So if you're not releasing that trauma or high def to low def of the trauma, then this coding just doesn't stick as well.
That's right. It doesn't stick. And so that's why, and it'll stick for a little bit or maybe not at all, or maybe, oh yeah, I do feel better. I got a different way of looking at it. But then the old trauma comes up and the mind is, it starts to activate and start to go into activation. As long as the activation is still present, the codes are still going to run. But you can change the codes once you get rid of the trauma. The codes are just there as protection. And so it erases them. And it starts building new neural pathways to build new responses.
Yep. So do you have to know which event was traumatic? So let's say someone was like, I don't think I had any trauma. And then they come to you. Does that work? Or do you, part of your exploration in that first 4 hours is finding something that they connected to that created a belief? Or does this work a little bit better when someone is like, I know there was this event that I'm holding on to?
Most of the people have a pretty good idea of what the traumatic event is, but some people don't. And if they don't, then we uncover it during, so I'll say, when you were a child, did anything ever happen? No, I never had any, real trouble when I was a child. And then all of a sudden I start hearing about a parent, and it could be one incident, but one incident could create a major effect on the child. A child between the ages of 0 and 7 has no ability to use reason and logic. Like ADHD is described, as a disorder of the brain. It's not a disorder of the brain, it's a coping mechanism. If the child grew up between 0 and 7 with a lot of trauma in the household, there was a lot of stress, a child can't fight or flight. They don't have the ability to do that. So how do they protect themselves? They basically do this. They close up. They shut off all the things that interfere, right, with them feeling safe. So they tune out what they don't like. And then the mind then creates, then you stick the child in a school at 7 years of age and say, now it's time to focus. Well, they don't like the teacher. They don't like the school. They don't like what they're being taught. So they tune it out. And then all of a sudden they say, well, this child now has ADHD. And what the child really has is an inability to focus. All they have to do is retrain the brain.
Have you worked with children? Do you work with children?
I don't. I work with a little bit with children, but not too much. But it is something we want to focus on, because if a child grows up with that belief that they're not safe, or they're whatever the meaning they've attached to it, that's going to continue on, and then they're going to build coping mechanisms to deal with it. And so a lot of the trauma comes back to ages 0 to 7. That's where the mind is the most focused.
Okay.
And so, but they operate in a theta brainwave state. So the mind is actually in a theta state. So theta is the state that you go into sleep. For children, it's a waking state. So children are waking, but they're in theta brainwave state, which means they have no ability to use reason and logic. It isn't until they become 7 to around 8 to 12 they start developing that ability. But then it's already set.
Right.
So their mind is set.
Okay. Well, my daughter just turned 6, and now you made me think of every experience I'm sharing with my daughter in her theta brainwaves, which is important. So as a parent, and then for all the listeners who are parents, knowing that and really just honoring that time for a child between newborn and 7, what are just some things that parents could think about for their children as far as how they communicate or what a child needs at that time?
Well, you have to be very careful the way you say things to children. And I use an example of my wife. My wife was 6 years of age. She's in a traumatic household to begin with. And then she gets invited to a tea party that some of the mothers had put on. And so they put this tea party together. Bridget, she dresses all up. Her grandmother dresses her really pretty. She goes to the tea party, and one of the mothers says, "Oh, Bridget, look at you. You're going to be a real heartbreaker when you grow up." And all the other mothers are like, "Oh, yeah, she's going to be a real heartbreaker." She got sick and went home. She says that she thought they were telling her that she's going to hurt people.
Yeah.
She doesn't have the ability to understand language. So even with the best of intentions, the mothers are complimenting her. She thinks they are seeing something in her that, she's going to hurt people when she gets older. She didn't mean that at all.
Yeah.
The mothers, they were trying to compliment her. But that's a great example of, even with the best of intentions, you can then create these emotional concussions. So you need to figure out, what did your child hear? So when you say something, make sure, tell me what you understood there, right? And then they'll say this. And they go, "Oh, that's not what I meant."
Okay.
Right? And then you rephrase it. So be careful how you say things, because we just flippantly use terms that we're used to. And that can have a major effect on the kids.
Wow. Yeah, I'm literally replaying for 5 years. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. I mean, as parents, we all are like, we don't want to mess up our children. Of course,
Yeah.
there's some like inadvertent things like what you said, but yeah, it's about having that conversation and keeping the understanding of what they heard and what they felt.
Well, just as an example, when I'm 6 years old, I'm growing up in this traumatic household, in this relatively untraumatic household. My father is downstairs and he's doing his bills. So then I go down, I sit down with him and I say, well, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm writing out the bills. So he takes out the electric bill and he says, here's the electric bill, here's the amount. I write a check, you know. He says, now take the check and take the bill, put it in the envelope, you know, and then he gives me a sponge to seal it and a sponge to put the stamp on. So I remember stealing the envelope, putting the stamp on. He says, now do me a favor and run it down to the mailbox. And he says, that'll be a big help for me. So I'm all excited that I'm working with Dad, right? So I run down to the post office, like the mailbox. I take it in. I run back, and I see my dad's not at his desk. But I see all the other bills and envelopes. So I think I'm just going to take the initiative. So I start stuffing bills into envelopes, no address, no nothing, seal it up. I used every one of his stamps, stamp it, run them down to the post office, mail them, right? Come running back. And my dad looks at it and he goes, where are the other bills and envelopes? And I said, well, I mailed them for you. And he said that what he did is he laughed. And he says, I don't think I explained that very well. You know, where a lot of parents would have blamed the child.
Right.
What's wrong with you? Why would you think you should do that? You know, and you would have had a big problem. But my dad got it. He understood that what he was saying, I didn't get.
Yeah.
And that was true. And so it's a lot of the things that you say and how you say it and the meaning they attach to it that makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I will definitely take that every day with my daughter. So thank you. So
I've done a course. I've done a course on it now.
Oh, you
so
have?
I've got a course. I've got a course that's coming out for parents, and it's based on my book. Don't mess with my DNA.
Okay.
And so what I did a study on DNA, and the DNA changes. Not the DNA changes, but the gene regulation in the DNA changes. And but you can affect the way that gene is regulated. And so the genes that regulate inflammation uprise during trauma, and the genes that recognize the immune system go down along with neuroplasticity. So that's the way the genes are responding to the threat. But the threat never goes away. So it stays in high inflammation, stays in low immunity, low neuroplasticity, and then they become sick. And then all of a sudden they're getting sick all the time and they're struggling all the time. That's because of this unresolved trauma. So with the best of intentions, you can have a major effect on your child. So I named it after my book, Don't Mess With My DNA, where I talk about how you can affect your child's DNA by the way you say things, and even with the best of intentions.
Yeah. Tell me more about this book, which I want to read.
So what I did is I put together a study, and I did a pre-DNA test and a post-DNA test, before and after, people who've gone through trauma. Okay. And what I showed is that the pre-DNA test would show inflammation, like IL-6, CRP, and then low inflammation because of the genes that would go down, along with neuroplasticity. So that's what my theory was, is that's what happened when we had unresolved trauma. Then I did a post-DNA test after they finished the program, finished the audios. I saw a major change in inflammation. Inflammation reduced 40, 50%, and the immune system increased 100%, and along with neuroplasticity. So I did a second gene study on neuroplasticity. So the gene FKBP5, which would regulate neuroplasticity, would also be lowered. So I never understood what my wife was saying when I first met her. she said she was not a very good student. And I said, why don't you think you're a good student? She said, well, I could read a page in a book and I have to read it 3 times before I could understand it. So she worked extra hard. That was her neuroplasticity, the gene that regulates that.
Okay.
So if you're being chased by a lion, think of it this way. You're being chased by a lion, your mind's not going to want to do maintenance and it's not going to want to do learning.
Right.
So it's going to lower all those things. But it's a temporary response until the danger's over.
Okay.
But the danger's never over. So the trauma still keeps running. And then it keeps the system out of balance. So that's what I wrote about in the book.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to make sure I share that as well and pick up a copy on that. So I absolutely love that. So what would be your hope for the future as it relates to trauma? And let's bring it broad to society, to the world, to just interaction and interpersonal relationships. Just kind of where do you sit with trauma and your hopes for the future?
I think 80% of the physical illnesses that we're dealing with are psychological based, which means a lot of that is trauma. So if we resolve this trauma early and we can get to children very early, then we can resolve the gene regulation, we can improve the health. That doesn't mean that there's never going to be any trauma and there's never going to be any, dysfunction in the system, but it's going to be a lot less. And I think we can actually do that. So long term, I'd like to see most people go through this program and then get their trauma resolved and then deal with the current trauma a lot better. And then they're going to be a lot healthier. Got
it. So is this something that we have to do ongoing because life happens? So we deal with the past and then or are we more resilient than moving forward into the future?
Well, I think if you had a lot of trauma in your childhood, it's like taking a 165-pound backpack and taking it off. Then when you get another 10 pounds of trauma, I can deal with that. And so you're going to eliminate those much quicker. But it's the accumulation of all the trauma that has happened in our lives that our mind is responding to. So that's why you can change it by getting this trauma out early, and then it's going to change the response.
So for your program specifically, or for someone to work with you, because again, understanding you have a unique approach, is it all done one-on-one? Do you have pre-recorded? My guess is you would have to guide them through this. Just tell us a little bit more on how that works and how you structure it.
Well, obviously, the one-on-one is the most powerful. So you can come one-on-one and deal with me.
Okay.
That's the most expensive. But then we have a digital version of it. Okay. So it's the same program with all videos, but it's just me taking you through the whole program for 4 hours or 5 hours.
Oh, okay.
And then you'll still resolve it. Then I also do groups, and I can do large groups. So I just did a group of 45 people, and the response was amazing. And they all got the same kind of healing, and nobody had to talk about the trauma. So it was all just dealing with, and 45 people all at the same time going through trauma response. And I bring up 1 or 2 people to demonstrate, some of the techniques, and then we all go through it as a group. But that works very well. And then I have Zoom as well, so I can do Zoom, but that's like personal.
Got it. Okay. With that group that you did, do you host these groups, or are you invited? Are they retreats?
Generally, I'm invited, so we haven't gotten any, but people will ask me to come and do the whole group for them, and I do that. Okay. So we can do that as well.
Wonderful. And then that is followed by your 30-day recording that they are reinforcing the high def to low def of that trauma.
Yeah, they've probably done a lot of it, but then it's picking up any other events. And so the 3 events that they did is probably pretty well cleared, if not always cleared. And then they continue to work on anything new, anything that wasn't resolved. But chances are, once they've got the base down, then the mind continues to run the program. Okay. So it continues to run it at nighttime. And when you're asleep, your mind runs the trauma.
Got it. So what do you say to the listeners who are like, is it that simple, Dr. Don? How do you respond to that?
It really is. It just seems hard to believe, but it actually is that simple. So your mind can actually process this. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your mind. Your mind is designed to do this. It's supposed to protect you. It's dealing with a glitch, an error message, and we need to get the glitches out of there. And that glitch is basically the trauma that keeps responding. You keep responding to it real time, but it's not.
I appreciate that. So where do the listeners learn about your program, follow you, I'm sure? I know you have your own podcast. So tell us a little bit more on how we can follow you.
There's one, you can go to www.inspiredperformanceinstitute.com. The other one is TIPP, T-I-P-P, it's TIPP.com. And that way you can sign up for the program or learn about the program. You can even call in and just ask questions. I have all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of interviews. I'm on social media a lot. You can learn a lot that way as well.
Wonderful. And then get your book.
You Must Be Out of Your Mind is the first one, which is the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
Emotional Concussions, which is number 2. And then the third one is Don't Mess With My DNA.
We're going to share all 3. I want to read all 3 of these. I absolutely love it. I love your work, Dr. Don, and how you are helping people move past their trauma and live in high performance. Thank you so much for being a guest on Root to Rise, and I hope to chat with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. For everyone who tuned in, I hope that you enjoyed. Definitely check out Dr. Don's work, check out his program, and I highly suggest reading his books. Thank you so much, and I will see you in another episode.